Hello and welcome to another edition of Press Row on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Happy to have you along with us for another edition here of Press Row, and it's a Teams All Together edition of Press Row. Good to get everybody back together. Bill Thomas joining us from a socially distant distance away via the next box over, and Kate Robbins joins us here as well, and happy to have all of you along with us as well for this conversation as we kind of delve into a lot of the different things that, of course, have been going on in the community, both athletically and beyond, and what that's going to do and mean for the future, as well as, of course, kind of taking a look at some of the future adjustments the MIAA will have, and maybe some future adjustments we'd like to see from our friends at the MIAA as well as we continue. But first, we begin with a hello, Bill Thomas. Great to have you here. Good to see you again. It feels like it's been forever since the basketball season ended. We were looking forward to getting started with spring sports, and that unfortunately was all for naught.
Hey, it's great to see you guys too. You know, this social distancing thing is starting to get me a little stir crazy, but you know, in this day and age of the internet, and you know, this is about the best we can do right now, and it's helping to help maintain some sense of sanity. But you're right, everything got cut off so abruptly. Not even time to say, hey, I'll see you next season, or you know, good luck. And you know, it just the way things just stopped, you know, right in the middle of everything we were broadcasting, you know, what we had done with all the basketball playoffs, and just the baseball season, much like last year. You know, we got started early and then we got derailed a little bit, but we'll be back, and I'm sure the sports will be back too.
And that's what we're all looking forward to. And of course, you know, Billy mentioned it, Kate. The thing that's probably most interesting about this scenario was we were just barely at the end of our coverage because, of course, the teams we were following had been eliminated from the playoffs. There was still one more round to conclude the winter sports season that ultimately never happened.
And that was one that was the initial heartbreak of that season ending so abruptly. Right off the bat, you have the MIAA having to make the decision that the basketball and the winter finals, and including hockey as well, and some of the other sports, not able to continue. So right off the bat, you have this incredibly difficult heartbreak that the winter athletes are facing. And then just a week after that, you have the first of a number of heartbreaks for the spring athletes that come about. And eventually you kind of see that play out over the last 5 weeks, and then you feel for those athletes as well. Right off the bat, you are heartbroken for the winter athletes. Oh my gosh, those teams aren't going to be able to have a championship. And then a few short weeks later, we're now lamenting and heartbroken for all the spring athletes, especially the seniors that are not going to be able to participate in a senior season. And it's just, again, I've said it multiple times already, it's heartbreaking for those athletes.
Yeah, without a doubt. And when I think about, of course, you know, those athletes who never got, you know, a season to kind of finish up their career, those senior athletes, and Bill Thomas, you can certainly jump in on this as well. I think about those seniors who walked off the field at the end of their junior year. And with sports, it's always, you know, just wait till next year. We'll get them again next year. You got one more year. You're going to make that year count. And then that year just never materializes. It's not something in sports you're really able to prepare for, nor is it a way that you can really compare it to anything else.
Yeah, Todd and Kate, and the thing that's most disheartening about the way the spring season was ripped out from under the spring athletes is, you know, in high school, we see it somewhat at Leominster, 3-season athletes. You know, we see it with the football team, and some of those kids show up on the basketball court. Inevitably, there's the catcher or a pitcher or somebody shows up on the baseball team. But the athletes that really wait for their sport, and especially the spring sport athletes that didn't play in the fall or in the winter, those are the athletes that I have the you know, the most feelings for, that didn't get that opportunity that they were waiting for. You know, granted, the 3-sport athletes, maybe the winter or the fall sport was not their sport, but the fact that the single sport athletes that didn't have their opportunity just to perform in that one sport, I really feel for those athletes
especially for the sheer amount of time, of course, they spend preparing for those seasons. And of course, you know, we talk a lot about this, you know, of course, across our coverage, whether it be, you know, football rule changes, or whether it be, you know, basketball alignments, or, you know, on and on and on. You know, we certainly do spend, you know, a heavy amount of time bashing the MIAA for how they manage certain events. And I've said it over and over with our different guests here on Press Row. You can't say enough. I I always preface it. We never, right? But I've always said, we'll give credit where credit is due. And when it comes to credit, a huge amount of credit has to be given to the MIAA for doing everything they possibly could to keep this spring season alive. They kept moving the field just a little bit farther and a little bit farther and a little bit farther. And then until finally, obviously, the governor came in and ended the school year. And with education-based athletics, Kate, if there is no education, there will be no educational athletics.
And that's a no-brainer. And this is a situation where the MIAA has to take its cue from the state and from DESE. So at the end of the day, the ball isn't really in their court. But what was so masterful about their performance this spring, although everything happened behind closed doors, those meetings, you could tell that the ultimate decision making was always in the interest of the student athlete. They were going to try to make it possible, make it feasible at first for there to be a playoff system at the end, and then they were going to try to make it feasible for there to be a season at all. Their flexibility was absolutely masterful. Again, ultimately, at the end of the day, the decision was not theirs to make. The ball was completely out of their court, but it was not as if March 17th rolled around and they said, well, week one's gone and we're not going to be able to make this work because, we have to have our playoffs done by, June 3rd. They did a very nice job and, again, masterful in their decision-making. Even though none of it ends up coming to fruition at all, they really did go above and beyond anything that anybody could have asked to try to make sure that if school came back, even if school came back, May 30th, it was as if they were going to say, you know what? Give the uniforms out, get on the field, get out there, make something happen, give these student athletes something so that they have this opportunity because they understand how precious it is. So we do have to tip our caps to the MIAA that in this, incredibly difficult situation, and again, incredibly in a situation where the decision was not theirs to make, that what they could control, they did a really, really nice job controlling.
And the time was so precious and so few, Bill Thomas, to really be able to get that in, to continue to keep moving the pylon. The only thing that they couldn't move was that June 30th funding deadline for public education because, of course, July 1 starts a new budget year. So it was about the only thing they couldn't move. They went as close as June 28th for a postponement date to be able to squeeze everything in. Hope has been so important. They did everything they could to maintain the hope.
Yeah, and Kay, you make a good point that, and you too, Todd, the MIAA has been, moving the goalposts, as you like to say, to try to make it to the kids' advantage, to the student athletes. And even if it was just going to be some type of late May, early June round robin tournament where you could just get everybody involved, give the teams a week to get on the field, get their act together, and just some kind of a going away party type thing for the spring sports, so to speak, but it's we were driven by times of the unknown, and I think in the back of everybody's mind, we didn't know who the most vulnerable were, what segment of the population was going to be most heavily affected, elderly, the youth, as it's turned out, maybe the youth are the least vulnerable, but there's a lot more to think about than just the youth involved when it comes to schools and things that go along with schools, everything that supports the schools. So, we got to look out for everybody in these times, but we'll be back. It's unfortunate, but this is a learning time for the kids too, and the athletes, and they're transitioning. These student athletes who are seniors who are not coming back are transitioning to adulthood, maybe a little earlier than they wanted to, but, it's just something that we have to deal with. We can't just click our heels 3 times and expect this all to go away, because it's not going to.
I think one of the things we also have to consider here is that I don't necessarily, in my estimation, think that the most difficult job for the MIAA was the spring season. I think what you're seeing school administrations at the principal and superintendent level dealing with what happens now that the schools are closed, what happens next? I think that's actually going to be the more difficult job of the MIAA and these administrations. We're seeing what's happening with proms. We're seeing what's happening with graduations. Everything's up in the air. And then to even consider taking a look at what does school and athletics look like come August and September, I don't think that administrations and especially the MIAA are out of the woods. I think that they have climbed the first few mountains, but I think their Everest is going to be coming up in September.
No, I think there's a really great point there too, and Bill Thomas kind of set us up to that point, which is, of course, the great unknown. You know, it's been something that I've talked about extensively with my students and other members, of course, that have appeared on these broadcasts, and that is the great unknown. We don't know what we yet don't know. The unknowns continue to come further and further down the line, and so I agree, Kate. You know, at this point, the first set of decisions maybe presented themselves and became very obvious, but the unknown is we don't know what comes next. What does education become, 6 months down the line? And how can we both, as folks involved with athletics or involved with education, how can we convince people that it's okay to come back and to return and to compete and to show up and to attend and do all the things, and to know that, yeah, 6 months has gone by and things have changed. What's that marker? I don't know that we really know what that is yet.
Well, I think like you say, we don't know what we don't know, but going forward, we've learned a lot in a short period of time now. And I think that the country did the right thing. And, you can't criticize one decision over another. We had to attack this like the enemy that it is. But you can't keep attacking. After a while, you got to go into a care and control mode. And to think that as a society, we're going to shut down for 12 to 18 months while they come up with a vaccine to protect every last human being. I mean, theoretically, yeah, in a fantasy world, that's what we'll do. But in reality, that's not going to happen. And going forward, we're going to have to learn how to manage this. It's not going to go away, but we got to figure out how to manage it, whether it's through the awareness that this is brought to the general public when it comes to safety and the flu season in general, and contact and people's private spaces, I think that the time of people getting up into your face and trying to make a point, I don't think we're going to have to deal with that much anymore, but it's going to change the way people interact. But I think we're going to develop as a people. We're going to have to move forward. Sports is not going to go away. Being in groups is not going to just end. I mean, that's how we live. Going back to the Stone Age, when groups of people were living in caves. I mean, different day and age now, but we live as groups, and that's where our enjoyment from life comes from. And there's got to be a balance there somewhere.
Oh, no question about that. I think about education, and we've been talking about it not just from educational athletics, but the broader form of education. And when people ask me about, this virtual education and a virtual classroom, it's great. It's a better supplement than nothing as far as, contact goes with everybody. But it is not the same from a level of dynamicism and from humanity, to be able to build that humanity and that camaraderie among a classroom and a group of people and a group of students. I know, Kate, and you and I see this every day. It is not even close. There's like a third or a fourth dimension that, this just flattens out. You need only, experience it. It's one of the axioms we talk about when we teach television and radio, and that is the idea that television flattens, for the audience, it flattens energy and it flattens emotion. It flattens connections. It really, although you are connected, somehow you are strangely disconnected while still being connected.
I mean, we have the good fortune to being able to see quite a few of our students on a weekly basis through, different online platforms. And I just had a group of 21 students that I got to see yesterday, and I was almost jumping out of my skin just to see their faces or to just see their name on a screen, just because we miss them so darn much. And then I start to feel, badly because I got to see those 21, but schedules didn't permit others, or an inability to be able to take time off from helping their families out. And some of my students are sick as well. They're just not all able to participate every single week. And so it's that joy of seeing everybody that is there, and then that lamenting everybody that you don't see and everybody that you're worried about on top of things. And I kind of have this strange, I teach at the post-secondary level online. And so I have groups of graduate students that I never meet in person from around the world. And so there are some aspects of online education that I appreciate, because I get to make connections with students all around the world. But my kids that I see every day in school and that I worry about every day in school, like Todd said, it's not the same. I'm thrilled that I still get to see some of them. I miss all of them so much, and just I can't wait to see them in person again.
And to be able to build that level of camaraderie. And Bill, you had mentioned to us as we were prepping for getting together today, the distinctive differences for people that are outside of the world of education, or even outside of the working world, those who are, fortunate enough to have done their service for their community and now be in the retirement world. This has kind of put a strange kind of damper on your world, because you can't go out and have those socialization pieces that you were, so used to. That was such a great part of your life, even to get a chance to go into the radio station, to be able to participate in the morning show. You got to do it from long distance.
Well, you hit my problems right on the head, Todd. Mine is the lack of social aspect. At my age, I mean, I'm in what they like to refer to as the high risk group for more than one reason. Let's start with age. But I don't feel like I am, and I'm not trying to live my life like I am. But you're right. Whether it was our broadcasting plans, whether it was the next game we had planned or what we had planned this spring going forward, I really look forward to that. Going into the radio station on Monday mornings and hanging with Travis and Sherman at WPKZ. I really look forward to that. Playing pool. All this is going to change going forward. And it's really given a lot of thought into what the social life is going to look like for me, because I don't have a job to go back to per se. I've been living without a schedule for the last 10 years for the most part. So it's really about how I'm going to immerse myself back into my social life with all the interactions that I had prior to, what happened here, with the COVID crisis. But I'm going to look forward to it. I'm going to, these relationships are going to continue one way or the other. I'm looking forward to us sitting on a sideline. If it's, we have to figure out a way to broadcast a football game from the parking lot with binoculars because they don't want to let us through the fence. I'm sure we'll come up with something. But you're right. The social aspect of my life is really how I've been impacted. And as a person, a retired person who, relies on sociability, I'm reduced to riding my bicycle on the rail trails or going for a walk or fishing. And even for a while, they didn't want you fishing. They had signs up here at the reservoir in Clinton, no fishing because of COVID. I'm like, you can't get more socially isolated than fishing. I don't know any two fishermen that want to stand within earshot. Never mind, this is my area. But it's like golfing now has become the big controversy. And it just, people got to settle back into the social part of life. Jobs and work situations are going to be a whole new challenge, but you can't live without the sociability part of life.
The poor introverted fishermen of the world.
Well, I tell you,
I don't even want to be social.
Fishermen, it's a very solo style activity. You want to be isolated. You want to be in your own spot. And it's just, it's kind of like hunting. Hunters go out into the woods by themselves. They don't want to be hunting with somebody else and they both see the same game and decide who's going to flip a coin to see whose turn it is to take a shot at it. But it's part of moving forward in life. Things are going to change, but we'll adapt. And I'm looking forward to getting back together with you guys and finding a game to call, or a race between two crickets and see who can get them to jump the fouls. Maybe frog jumping races. We might have to go back to the ESPN of the 80s roots to find something to broadcast, but I'm sure we'll come up with something.
There'll certainly be a time and a place for that, hopefully real soon. And of course, we've talked about this with education leaders and athletic directors and coaches as well, and tried to imagine what athletics is going to look like when we come to the other side of this, which, I think the thing we can all get our head around is there is another side of this. We will get to the other side of this. There's a question of how long it's going to take to get to that point, but there will be another side. And then, of course, as you said earlier, Bill Thomas, athletics will continue. Education is going to continue. Athletics will continue. And so when we get to whatever that point is, I've been trying to imagine a classroom. I've used this example, where I'm looking at everybody wearing a mask and everybody's looking at me wearing a mask. Kind of a weird foreign thing, especially for somebody, like myself, I can say, who relies so much on facial cues. I pride myself on my ability to read facial cues from people. When you can't see but half a face, it limits the amount of facial cues you have to work off of. And especially when, we talk about teaching, radio and television, the importance of being able to sell a story or to show passion comes a lot from the face. And so when you only have half of that to work with, could change our society dramatically in some passions as well, or in some positions as well. And then I think beyond that, into the world of athletics, it probably doesn't get any more, lack of social distance or space bubble violating than the sport of football, which in Massachusetts is, about as big a sport as you're going to get at the interscholastic level. And I don't think a mask, whether it's made of paper or whether it's made of copper, is going to change the fact that people are going to breathe, and they're going to breathe on each other. I mean, that is the reality of that sport. I don't know what sports looks like. Shields, I don't know. I just don't know what that looks like on the other side, or what it's going to look like to the rest of us.
Well, think about that on a basketball court too, playing defense, and you're leaning over the big guy in the middle and you triple team him and everybody's breathing on him. And, you're right. Sports, there's certain sports where you could create that separation, whether it's, track and field sports, for instance, a lot of it's individualized. Where you're trying to set your own mark, and then that mark is compared to somebody else in a lot of the track and field sports, or some of the sports that kind of create distancing on its own, such as baseball. I mean, there's not a lot of close-knit interaction. Yeah, there are the quick interactions up close, but you're not grouping up, you're not huddling. Everybody's got their own area to protect. So I think we're going to ease into this. And when it comes to high school sports, you can't really compare them to the pro sports when it comes to crowd attendance. I think being able to social distance people that want to attend high school sports, and we know which sports are the glamour sports and which sports aren't. And that's what at Rival Family Media we were looking at doing, is to bring you the non-glamour sports. And so I think that can be worked around, but there are going to be challenges. It's going to affect rivalries going forward. And we've seen some great rivalries up to this point, and how we deal with that, and not to lose that aspect of what we've had for, between Fitchburg and Leominster over 130 years. That's what's going to be challenging going forward to help maintain some normalcy there.
I think we can all agree that when it comes to education-based athletics, whether it's at the high school level or the college level, it's been made fairly clear. If there is no resumption of normal education, there will be no athletics that goes along with them. So the question becomes, with the things that we're hearing now, with school districts maybe considering having to deliver an online education for the entirety of the 2020-2021 school year, potentially one of those things being on the horizon. Kate, I'll say it first to you. Is there a possibility that we don't have athletics come September? And is there a possibility that lasts on into the 2021 calendar year as well? I mean, how long can this go? How long can we do this in the world of education, beyond the world of athletics? How long can we do this in the world of education before eventually we've got to take that leap and find a way, before herd immunity really sets in and before a formalized vaccine sets in, where we can resume some form of normal operation enough to allow us to start having athletics again?
Well, I think the different levels are going to kind of key off of one another. I think that the NCAA is afforded a little bit more flexibility because they just do. they make their decisions just how they do. I mean, they have to speak obviously to the various television and radio deals that they have, but at the end of the day, there are money-making sports at the NCAA level that we've already heard maybe shifting some things schedule-wise, but you can't do that at the high school level. And I think in addition to not only the physical worries that we're talking about with our student athletes at the high school level, there really truly is also going to be an economic burden as well. When you're talking about the fact that, you have 100 girls or 100 boys trying out for track, well, you can't have busing that is going to be able to take care of that without added cost. So you're talking about the ability to have a full slate of athletes come out. If you have a no cut policy versus a cut policy, what does the busing look like? Varsity's not going to be able to travel with JV, so are you really going to be able to afford multiple buses to take one trip? I don't think crowds at the high school level are going to be an issue. Like you go, if you go to Doyle Field, I mean, even if it's a Leominster-Fitchburg game, I'm going to worry, but we might be able to figure out, something. And on the everyday, that's not going to be a problem. But I think it's going to be the everyday. What does a practice look like? If we go back to school and we're able to social distance and come up with things. We've heard all sorts of stories coming out of all sorts of places around the world. Are we going to have one-way hallways? Are we going to have split school sessions where only some grades come in? Are students going to be coming in every other day and splitting the population that way? But at the end of the day, you're going to have athletics, and how are they going to be able to interact with one another? You're not going to be able to have 60 girls on volleyball teams all sharing the same gymnasium for practice, let alone for games. So I think that with regard to the physical aspects of how things are going to be able to move forward, I think the professional level and the NCAA are probably going to be a good indicator of what that looks like. Is it going to be a face shield? Is it going to be, we're going to wait? Is it going to be, you're going to get tested before every game in the NFL, which is probably what's going to end up happening, or something like that. Are you going to be sequestered if you're an NCAA athlete or something? It's going to be a very interesting landscape. And I think that there are physical barriers that we're going to have to overcome. We're going to have to overcome economic barriers. I think we're going to have to deal with societal norms as well. Because what happens if your football coach has a wife who is immune compromised or is pregnant, and now they can't coach because also there's so many variables. It's an algebraic equation that I'm glad I don't have to solve.
Yeah, no question about that. And Billy, I think about this. One of the things we've heard is maybe, when it comes to like busing as an example, whether it's to school or whether it's if it's not to school or beyond to school, if it's to an athletic event, they've talked about just lowering the population on buses. Well, I've heard running them half full. Well, if it takes 20 buses to send people to school in this day and age just to get them into the classrooms, and you're talking about doubling that cost by sending 40 buses out in order to be able to do that. I was going to say, in and of itself, that doesn't, really work. And there aren't enough buses, there aren't enough drivers, and there's not enough, financial. As it is, transportation is already one of the largest costs in public education. So how do you send 40 buses when you already can't afford 20?
Well, when Kate was, talking about the challenges about transporting athletes, let's get to the first challenge, getting the kid to school. I mean, you can't have separate buses for athletes and non-athletes to begin with. So where do you stop the commingling? Do you just worry about the athletes when they show up at the gymnasium for a game? Then you got to worry about the entire student body, not just the athletes, because you can't stop you can't isolate. And I think that's where it's going to be such a challenge going forward. You can't isolate in certain segments of the population so they don't interact with other segments of the population. And you certainly can't do that with students, especially if you're trying to isolate the athletes from the non-athletes or even by classes, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Some of them take the same classes even though they're not in the same grade level. So, I mean, there are so many challenges when it comes to interactions that if they figure those challenges out, by the time we get to the athletics level, those challenges, I think, can be applied. But there are so many more challenges before we can even start thinking about that, because there'll be a lot of lessons learned before we play any games.
And Bill Thomas, that's a great place for us to transition a bit here. We'll obviously learn a lot more about, what COVID-19 means to the rest of education and athletics going forward in the coming weeks and months ahead as we start to learn more about what a return to normalcy looks like, which gives us a chance to talk a little bit more, maybe broadly, about what's gone on in athletics in the 2019-2020 school year. And it's been amazing when I was starting to prep for some of these Press Row broadcasts to write down all the things that have gone on, right? You go back to the end of the summer of 2019 before this school year started, and because of heat, You had an inability to get the season started. Kids couldn't go for their usual longer day, double session training sessions to get, obviously, the fall athletic season jump started before the school year began. Then you had the Triple E phenomenon where the mosquitoes were forcing everybody to, of course, have to make modifications in what it is that they were ultimately doing. Then you had all the rules changes that were coming in this year. And of course, that created a wrench in football and in volleyball and also, in ice hockey and others, and people trying to kind of understand those concepts. And then you had the execution of those rules where you had people that were involved that didn't really know what they were supposed to be doing or hadn't considered all the factors that were involved in that. And then you kind of make your way through the winter sports season when it looks like things might get closer to normal, and then look out, there it is, COVID-19 whacks you upside the head and you lost the entire spring sports season. That's a capsule, but that's a drop in the bucket of what this athletic year has been like, and it gives us an opportunity to talk a little bit about how we can make future changes and what obviously we would like to see from future changes somewhere along the way. And Kate, you and I have been talking about this rather extensively, of course, with all the number of things that have been accommodated this year. When athletic administrators go back and talk about this, both within their leagues and then obviously at a broader statewide level and then nationally as well, athletics is going to need a bit of a facelift, a bit of an adjustment going forward in order to function in this new society.
And that's absolutely true. This academic year has been one for the record books, that's for sure, in the state of Massachusetts, from west to all the way to the east. I mean, it affected nearly every sport. It certainly affected every single athletic director. And it's one that I think is going to be a precursor, as we said, to trying to determine what comes next. What does all of this look like? And at the end of the day, I don't envy the positions of anybody that works at the MIAA or athletic directors, and I certainly don't, I don't envy the positions of any of the administrators in any of these buildings, because you're not going to be able to make everybody happy. You're just not going to be able to make everybody happy. But fortunately, their position is meant to look out for the greater good of their entire group. So the MIAA will look out for the entire state. Individual athletic directors and individual leagues and conferences will do the same for them as well. And we saw that in the football season in the fall. We saw that obviously the Triple E threat was most prevalent in the southern part of the state, southern Worcester County. We know that they were getting hit really hard. And so things in the southern part of the state looked very different than they did up here in northern Worcester County. And so I think you'll see different areas. You can look at a map of Massachusetts right now to see what COVID looks like throughout the state. And if you're living in Suffolk County or Middlesex County out in eastern Massachusetts, this is a very, very, very difficult time. And it's one that I think is going to scar the general community for a very long time. In Worcester County out here in central Massachusetts, obviously we're incredibly significantly impacted. Our numbers are not what they look like in eastern Massachusetts. So even if we look like we might be ready to go before eastern Massachusetts, then you have to have that, that caution. We got to make the right decisions in order to not make things worse at that point in time. So I think we'll see I think it's going to be a very organic process as to how education rolls out, how athletics roll out. And like Billy said, I think that athletics will key off of what's going on in the greater atmosphere of education to try to figure out where do we go from here.
And Bill Thomas, of course, will pick up, on this point, which is, when you go to move forward and you think about all of these things and what's happened to athletics, throughout this year, and of course, with the COVID-19 piece aside, there have been so many moving pieces and changes. And of course, anytime you get into changes, people get very cloistered in their process. A lot of people don't like change when you look at people as a giant, category, not individuals. I think it becomes very difficult. What has come out of this, what's been very enlightening in some of the discussions we've had, is the importance, obviously, of the structure more regionally, within your league structure, and how that then affects the decision-making when you go beyond. But the words Kate used a few moments ago that I think always becomes part of the conversation when we think about governance at the MIAA is the greater good, and just how difficult it is for people to manage and make decisions for the greater good of athletics when they have concerns about population size, being competitive, getting kids to come out for sports, and how all those pieces fit together when it comes to ultimately the day-to-day of having games within your region.
Well, we saw the rule changes that had been made when it comes to the football system and the playoffs that were going to be implemented or will be implemented coming the fall of 2020, that we were already looking forward to. And we were talking with the coaches ahead of time about the 50% rule and, top 32 teams and regions in the country, in the state. I'm not sure how they were going to all balance it all out, but very similar to the basketball system where, you have a halfway decent season. And we saw teams that had great seasons, especially, football teams in this area that would go, 6-3 or 5-2, but not have a strong season. People would wonder why they didn't make the playoffs, well, strength of schedule, or why they were in the playoffs based on who they played. So now I think it's going to take a lot of that away. It might make things a little more competitive. It's definitely going to generate more interest going forward. When we come to the football season, we already saw that a lot in the basketball season. Baseball season operates the same way. So it was something I was really looking forward to see how this implementation of the Max Preps system, something entirely new for us. And I loosely follow the Max Preps national website for information. I never joined it. I'm a big fan of the Telegram home team webpage. I mean, I got more information after that than I could know what to use. And Kate can tell you, I'd always find something off of that page if it was 5 minutes before a broadcast just to talk about it. And I loved it. And I do love it. I'll still utilize it. But this whole Max Prep system was the great unknown going forward. Just one more thing going forward that come fall sports, hopefully it'll give us something to talk about besides how we're going to maintain social distancing.
Well, and it's a chance to look at the combination, right, of how things can be handled better or worse, right? So if we look at the MIAA handling of spring 2020 athletics and how they were incredibly open and transparent and how they had media on the calls and you had people tweeting about how those conversations went, and it was a very open process where we were able to then provide to an audience who isn't available to that every day what was going on with the decision-making process. I think that made such a big difference in people understanding that, yeah, the MIA really did go above and beyond to try to do the right thing in this scenario. Switch to the other side of this conversation about Max Preps, Bill Thomas, and we're around it every year, at least 2/3 of the year covering athletic events. And as it turns out, surprise, surprise, this Max Preps thing, before we even get into a discussion of the statewide tournament, which is something that's not going to start until 2021, 2022, which is a full school year away, the Max Preps thing was a done deal and was starting for this fall. And I found that out at a meeting discussing a tournament that isn't going to take place until 2 years down the line. So somewhere along the way, the idea of transparency became a very important thing with a public health crisis, but it's been a missed boat in the conversation about, well, Max Preps is going to be governing and ranking everybody going forward, starting in the fall of 2020.
And I'm sure there was a lot of discussion behind the scenes that we weren't privy to. And, sometimes the MIA leaves us shaking our head when it comes to decision making. But for the most part, they've done a pretty good job, but we've had our moments, but that's part of discussion and being part of the media. We can't always be on the same side of the fence. Sometimes you two guys and myself are on the same side of the fence when it comes to an opinion. And somebody's got to make the decision, and that's what the MIA is taxed with. But first and foremost, they're going to tell you, you might not like the system, you might not like the way we implemented it, but we're doing it for the students. And the more students we can get engaged, if it's by creating more playoff slots and making things more competitive and keeping kids more engaged, whether it's on the fan side or the actual active athlete side, I think it's got to be all good going forward. We don't have to agree with it, but we know what the motive is.
And that governance piece that Bill Thomas is talking about, where somebody ultimately has to make the decision, I think, Kate, you and I have bandied this around a little bit, which is, and we've talked about this with some of the ADs as well, the idea that the MIAA, it's very much not a strong executive system. They have strong executive leadership, but it's not a strong executive system where they just act as king and deciding factor and it's done. It's not so much a legislative body, more like a Congress or a parliament, where people create bill suggestions and they put them forward, and then there's a debating, and then those groups of people get together, and ultimately you hope, and we'll leave the political part aside nationally, but the idea in theory is you elect representatives. Those representatives go forward in a democracy, in a representative democracy, and they decide for the greater good what's best for everybody. None of those are what the MIAA system is, and that's, I think, really important for people to understand. It is much more akin to, and I've used this example, the United Nations, the League of Nations from years ago. It's a structure where you have all of these people.
Entente cordiale.
Yes, exactly. And they all send,
they're out of my pay grade now.
They all send these representatives to this meeting of people. Yeah, it's a confederation. They all come together. They then have to propose ideas, and without a strong centralized set of leadership, have to debate what the greater good may be, but there's a bunch of factors. And Athletic Director Steve Kendall did a great job of laying this out in an earlier episode of Press Row. And that is ultimately his first responsibility as athletic director for Air Shirley, and for every athletic director for that matter, is to their sending school district. So it's to whoever they work for. That's the person who signs your paycheck. Those are the student athletes who you see and are responsible for every single day. So that's responsibility number one. And each school district has their own factors that play into that. Then there's factor number two, which is their leagues that they are involved in. So obviously, you work mostly within your league. So whether it's the Mid-Watch, whether it's the Southern Worcester County League, whether it's the PVIC out in Western Mass, whether it's the Middlesex League out in Eastern Mass, you have a league structure who you work with every day. Then you get back to, that structure, and then you have the sport. If you have an involvement with the sport, or you're involved with the sport level committee, you have whatever development from that is gone on. And then at the end of the day, you have statewide decisions and your allegiance to the state of Massachusetts. It is very difficult in that structure, Kate. We'll tap into your social studies dynamic here. It's very difficult to have all of these pulls and then get sent to a meeting and say, you're going to make the decisions for the greater good, because the greater good is fourth on the list.
Absolutely. So, we have a situation where essentially both at the state level, the MIAA, and we've even equated it to the NCAA at the national level, is essentially basically just a confederation. It's what the United States was under the Articles of Confederation. They wanted to continue to maintain their autonomy as states. So just like sports in Massachusetts want to continue to maintain their autonomy, leagues want to maintain their autonomy, the East, Central Mass, and the West want to be able to maintain their autonomy. But unfortunately, they know, much like the United States of America knew under the Articles of Confederation, that in order to defeat the British, they needed to come together and work together in order to do that. So there's nobody in the state of Massachusetts in an individual district, in an individual sport, or in an individual league, or in one of our regions that doesn't understand that there needs to be a governing body. That's obvious, but it's an aspect of federalism. And what the MIAA, in my estimation, it does very well, according to them, is that they're very good at deflecting these situations that they don't want to handle and saying, you know what, that's a league issue, that's a sport issue, that's a district issue, and they can be very slippery when they want to. But at the end of the day, if you want to get the chance to get a championship trophy and be considered the best in the state, then when we decide that we're going to implement a rule, you're going to follow that rule. And as the state governing body, we can tell you then you're not eligible for our playoff. And so it's a very tricky situation with regard to federalism, because there are instances where as the governing body, it's their way or the highway, and they're going to make a decision based on what they consider the greater good is. But at the end of the day, there's also not really anybody governing them. They don't answer to anybody. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, they can decide what issues they're going to take up. They can decide what issues they're going to deflect. And they're just going to basically say, well, that's a states' rights issue, as the federal government. The MIAA can just say, that's a sport issue, that's a district issue, that's a league issue, and we're only going to make decisions where we feel like making decisions. And they're pretty good at not answering the phone when they don't want it.
There's no question about that. And Bill Thomas, I've said, as it relates to a decision-making function, if I got to go back and reorganize this a little bit, and without any of these, rules, I think as somebody who doesn't have a direct, school district that he answers to from an athletic standpoint, I answer to them as a teacher. But if I could just remove myself from all of that and say, okay, I'm going to do what's right for sports, I think that's maybe we need to give up a little bit of that representative piece and agree to representatives, whether it be the idea of local commissioners, people who have the expertise in the sport understanding, but don't have the pull of individual school districts or individual leagues, and say, hey, you all go make the governing decisions and you're going to choose what's best for sports ultimately.
Yeah, but I think what the people don't want to give up is ultimately some sort of control, and they don't want to have autonomous people making decisions for them. And, each athletic director has somewhat of his own agenda, whether it's for his district, his school, his particular sport that, they might shine in. So everybody, it's hard to get everybody on the same page, but to swing back around, somebody's got to make a decision that at least won't make more than half of the people mad, I think, is the way you got to look at it, because you got to kind of have the majority on your side if you want something to work and you want people to buy into it. And the MIA, whether it's a different type of evaluation system that we've gone through with the basketball teams in the western part of the state, or using different ways to rank teams, they've kind of let different regions go off on their own a little bit. We see it in the East where they get to play an extra game, or it might, to pump up their ratings, and all in the old system. So, we'll see how things come together here going forward. But we got to get back on the field. That way we can actually have something to really sink our teeth into, and see how change, how effective change is, and if it works for the good or for the worse.
On the flip side of that same coin, you talk about potentially is the answer not having representatives that are so closely aligned with a specific district or with a specific league. On the flip side, we talk about this a lot in public education in general. There are people in politics, there are people on local school committees that basically make decisions for schools, and they consider themselves experts because they went through a school system as a student. And they make decisions for districts. They make decisions for states. They make decisions for individual schools. And we know at the federal government level and the state government level, you have people making decisions who are politicians in the realm of education. And so do you put it in the hands of somebody that might not be a day-to-day, everyday expert? Or are we going to deal with the fact that, there are some athletic directors that are heavily juiced in at the state, and they have a lot of pull at the MIAA, and they might have their own agenda, but would you rather have an expert making some of those decisions? Or do we place it into the hands of somebody that, well, okay, you went to school for 12 or 13 years, so you must be an expert on how to run a public school system.
And that's it. What makes somebody an expert?
Yeah.
The years of experience, I would certainly hope. See, I think if I got to myself, kind of create what that management would look like, and we've seen this a little bit, at the college level. I'd like to see former athletic directors, and and the MIA is great at getting former athletic directors. The problem is those athletic directors are beholden back to where they formerly came from. They have that connection, that political piece, right? So somewhere along the way, I would like to see some kind of governance, or at least a group of people that could say, all right, I'm retired. I no longer answer to that school. I no longer answer to that league. So I'm going to unplug, and I'm going to do what's best for the sport, because that's what I've been sent to this management committee to be able to do. That's one thought that I have. Two, I think former coaches can certainly play into this as well, where you're no longer actively coaching. I go back and I think about somebody like Ron Massafero, who got out of coaching in Leominster, after a long time career there, continued to coach at the prep school level for a while, but now is a guy with a ton of years of experience, who I think you could tap into those years of experience, get his input. And while, maybe he coached at Leominster in the Groton school and was involved in Fitchburg at one point in time, he doesn't work there anymore. So they don't sign his paycheck any longer, nor do they really, have any direct influence over what happens to him on the day-to-day anymore. So give him a chance to go in with his expertise, with all of that removed, and say, okay, what's best for the sport of basketball? Where do we need to go, at this point in time? And heavily weight that in the final decisions that get made, because at the end of the day, the MIAA suffers, as Kate pointed out, from the same thing the NCAA does, which is it starts, of course, with the athletic directors, and maybe it rolls up from their coaches individually to the athletic directors. They bring about changes within their committee to propose, and then it ends in a board of directors that's a series of former administrators, not necessarily all athletic administrators, but a series of administrators, much like the NCAA has their board of presidents, their board of governors, who are academics. They are not necessarily athletic experts who are going to move forward with any kind of knowledge. So what does the NCAA always suffer from? The decisions get made that ultimately ends at the financial, right? The NCAA always picks what's going to make the presidents the most amount of money. The MIAA doesn't maybe suffer so much from that, although other reporters that have appeared on this broadcast have made the argument that maybe financials, are the ultimate governing piece. But at the end of the day, if you're we'll put that aside and say you're in interscholastic athletics, you don't have big TV contracts, you don't have, revenue generating stream things that you're trying to split and divide. So the MIA doesn't suffer so much from that piece, right? They don't suffer from only making decisions based on money. And if they do, it's, how much more can I get for a ticket that people will still show up to a game for? So it's really small compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars the NCAA is trying to divide up from an ESPN TV contract. So if that's not the governing factor, then the decision gets made back down to the district level or the regional level. And yeah, they are all different, but they all have to function together. And at some point in time, we have to say, this is what is best, for our sport in order to get an outcome. And I think in some ways they do try. They want a tournament and they want a state champion that is most representative of the best team. And Tom Flanagan of the Telegram and Gazette is fond of saying the best team wins the state championship every year. And yes, disproportionately, they do tend to come from the eastern part of the state, but the best team in that particular sport does ultimately win every single year, whoever that may be. And so I think in some ways, yes. But in other ways, when you talk to these ADs and you hear about their issues at the district level, like when I spoke to both Dave Plazzi and Leominster, Craig Antossi of Fitchburg, Bill Thomas, the thing that struck me was that their big concern in all of this was not so much the statewide tournament, how you generate a playoff system. It was, where do they fit? What league by enrollment do they fit in? Are they a Division I team, a 2 team, a 3 team? Are they an urban team? Are they a suburban team? How do they fit in that grand scheme? So that seemingly was a bigger issue for them, where it seems like in other parts of the state, they're looking for better competitive balance. In Central, they believe they've got competitive balance. They're misaligned for where they are based on their size.
Yeah, and we've seen that season after season when I talk about misaligned.
Well, we appear to have lost our connection to Bill Thomas. Hopefully, we'll be able to get him back in a matter of moments. But Kate, I will kick this to you to pick up the thought process on that.
I think that one of the things, and I don't necessarily know how any of the other states in our 50 state country end up playing out in this one, but Massachusetts, for as small a state as we are with regard to distance, we have a lot of dynamicism in the type of education that we have to govern. You have charter schools, you have public schools that are urban, that are essentially rural, that are suburban. We have regional school districts. We have Catholic school education and other religious institution education that you have to worry about. We have Eastern Mass, where population density is incredibly high and is so in that entire 128-495 corridor, where Western Massachusetts and Central Massachusetts look very different from the rest of the state. And so I think that because we have vocational technical education as well on top of that. And so when you talk about Leominster and Fitchburg being concerned about how their numbers are counted, at the end of the day, it's an incredibly difficult thing. I mean, it seems like it's easy. Well, you have this many students, and so that's how we're going to be counted. Are we counting boys? Are we counting girls? Are we dealing with the fact that in vocational technical education, you have students that might be on co-op for half of their education and may be working and not able to participate in sports. You have a situation with St. John's in Shrewsbury where they only have boys. So all of a sudden, are you going to have a school that can recruit student athletes that have all the same gender and is half the size of other institutions? Are they then going to be placed in Division 4 because they only have 600 students or something like that? I mean, so it's again, there are a whole lot of variables, and at the end of the day, not everybody is going to be able to be placed exactly where they believe that they should be placed. At the end of the day, it's about equity, and as much equity as you can place into a system that's never going to be perfect.
No, without question, the lack of perfection certainly is definitely part of the overall idea. And when I think about conversations we had with some of these ADs and trying to understand kind of where they fit, when we were talking to Craig Antossi of Fitchburg, and they were talking about being, included and involved in discussions, being treated like Brockton or a Fall River or Springfield. When I imagine those cities in my own mind, and the key word is city, those are very, very, very large cities in my mind. And Fitchburg is not. It's a city much like Leominster they're right around that, 45 to 50,000 neighborhood at best, when we're then comparing them to, because of the type of involvement in their community and the dynamicism and what's there. By the way, those are other districts that have either schools that are 2, 3, and 4 times as large than the population that goes to Fitchburg High School. It's a very difficult thing to think that they all meet together and they're considered kind of be in the same boat together.
Well, and that's when you talk about, different variables. I mean, you have areas like Fitchburg that may not have the same numbers as some place like Lowell or a place like Brockton, but their socioeconomic situations might be similar, just in the fact that Fitchburg has to contend with having the amount of diversity from around the globe, and they might have the same type of diversity that a Brockton does, that a Leominster does, that other large places. We have a friend, I think.
All right, Bill Thomas going to rejoin us here. There you go. Hopefully we'll be able to get him back online with us.
Please be back.
Press
Todd
row
and I talking to ourselves per usual.
Press row here on Rivalry Family Media rolls on. Bill Thomas hopefully rejoining us here in a matter of moments here. There he is. There's our very own Bill Thomas rejoining us. Billy, we've been rolling right along. We'll give you a chance to catch back up. Kate, why don't you wrap up the point you're making?
So essentially speaking, you have these schools that at any given point in time, you don't just, and nor would I want a school just to be seen for one of its dimensions. Okay, Fitchburg has an incredibly diverse, richly diverse community. They have an incredibly diverse, richly diverse athletic situation. They have phenomenal academics. They are developing and evolving just as their population is. And Leominster does the same thing. Worcester's doing the same thing. I'm sure Groton Dunstable is doing the same thing there. I'm sure that Acton Boxborough or Shrewsbury or Wachusett Regional, everybody should not just be looked at for a single variable. Okay. I teach at a vocational technical high school. I would not want Assabet, and nor would anybody that works there, I think, want us to be judged on one set of criteria. We are way more than one set of criteria. And so the fact that Fitchburg can look to urban districts that have similar diverse backgrounds in their culture and can fit into that group, while simultaneously looking into Central Mass and fitting in with the Wachusetts and the Marlboroughs and the Shrewsburys and the Leominsters and regional school districts, and Leominster that has a CTE as part of it. I think that that's one of, as we were growing up in Leominster, diversity is our strength.
That's
Todd,
right.
We heard it on the PA every single morning. You have a situation where one of the great aspects of all these school districts is their dynamicism. And the fact that you have to take a look at these school districts with more than one lens. And I think it's what makes it amazingly special. And I also think it's what makes situations with athletics incredibly difficult to solve, because you shouldn't, you can't, you should never ever look at a school district from one angle. Because if we all looked at the school districts from one angle, then maybe St. John's and Shrewsbury should win every year. Then why do we play the games? Okay. Or if, that's the case, then 4 or 5 years ago when Fitchburg High School's football numbers were down, you didn't have Tom DiGeronimo coming in to try to salvage something, because why bother? Numbers were down. You don't have, the athletic director Antossi in Fitchburg right now, we're looking to add esports, looking to increase enrollment in a lot of his sports. You don't have Dave Palazzi looking at a map of brand new athletic fields that he wants to build if numbers are down, and they're going to be down forever and ever. That's the beauty about what happens. As you move forward, your district changes. Goodness, Fitchburg and Leominster in the 19th century, booming industrial towns, and both of them have transformed into something different, and something beautiful, and something positive. And that happens across the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And you're going to have times that you have to be looked at across the board. And that's one of the things that makes it very difficult in athletics, because again, every school system, every school district, every high school is a dynamic, it's a living, breathing thing. You can't look at it through one lens.
Bill Thomas, if it was up to you, how do we decide how these teams fit into what particular boxing category?
Well, I think you make a good point, you guys, but every school system has its own vision for its future. Mm-hmm. And whether the strength is in academics, athletics, automotive, the trades, every school system is different, and they have their own vision. And I think each school system needs to make its own decisions on what's best for their community. And we see that, within our own community, whether it's a school making a tough decision about cutting certain sports because of funding and not being able to put 100% effort into it, or like Leominster's doing, going forward with new athletic fields to help consolidate everything at the high school level. But still have those marquee places to play like Doyle Field is. But everybody has their own vision going forward, and everybody has to make their own decisions what's best for their community.
Somewhere along the way, we've got to put those together. And I know one of the things Craig Antossi was talking about is, some kind of a multiplier. That's always been the criticized piece of, when they rank people, is what's the multiplier? What we do know down the road, the MIA is looking at, and we've talked about here on Press Row, is the idea that instead of, if it's a boys sport, only using number of boys at a school as that, factor, in order to decide where you fit, is no longer going to be the case. And if it's a girls sport, it's not just going to be the number of girls. They're going to just put them all together, and your population is 1,200. Then 1,200 is the number that you're measured by. Or, as Kate pointed out a little bit ago, if you're St. John's and you got 600 or 1,000, that's what you got. You are what you are. But at the same time, athletically and participation-wise, those numbers don't work. So somewhere along the way, we've got to have some kind of a factor, whether it's mathematical or otherwise, that says, well, you've been really good, you continue to be really good, you have heavy participation in athletics, so therefore there has to be some kind of thing that says, okay, well, you belong a little bit further, you belong in this division, and then, okay, this group over here, you're seeing your numbers decline, you're not as competitive where you belong. Okay, we've got to move you down a division until you kind of work your way back up. There's got to be some kind of a factor there. And they mentioned it in Central Mass, and credit to them. They really have worked at that. And we'll use Fitchburg as an example again, where they were talking about how their baseball program struggled to the point of almost extinction. And so the, athletic directors within the Midwatch League got together and said, hey, we'll move you down a couple divisions, give you a chance to get your population back up, get some success. And hey, let's make no bones about this. If your team isn't successful, i.e. you don't win in high school athletics, kids don't come out for the team. Nobody wants to go 0-20. And so I know that, people of a certain age are watching this going, well, that isn't that it with sports. It's the struggle. It's the growing. It's the developing. It's the forming a team. Yes, it is all of those things. And this is not everybody's got to win and everybody gets a trophy. It's if you don't win, nobody's coming to play. Nobody wants to do that. There's too many other options in life right now to attract athletes. So if you want to attract athletes, people need to be able to win at some point in time. And I think a lot of what prevents them from winning and prevents those competitive games is getting into the right competitive balance. And so Central Mass thinks they've got it figured out. They've got the multiplier. They'll let teams move down. But the problem is, as Fitchburg saw, was they were able to play down within their own league to build things back up. But the MIAA as a baseball program said they were a Division I program. So when they went to the playoffs, they went and played against St. John's. They got spanked and they were out in the first round. And that's just the way it was. But they are at least on the rise. They got the chance to get 18 to 20 games under their belt. And they were 18 to 20 positive experiences. Even if they were losing within a margin that you would say is a competitive baseball game.
And they were putting themselves in positions to be successful too, not always playing, to above their competition. And that we know success breeds success. We've seen it in the sports we've been following for the last 10 years as broadcast partners with the region. And when a school is down for a couple of years, then all of a sudden, there might have been 50 kids on the football team, then 40, then 30, and the interest isn't there. And you're right. A lot of it has to do with interest. Success breeds interest, brings out the fan, it brings out the athlete, it brings out the parents, and it brings the community together around certain sports that are successful. And we see that with the ebb and flow with the fan attendance, and that goes hand in hand with the participation, and it all swings back around to success.
Indeed it does. All right, Bill Thomas, Kate Robbins, Todd Robbins here with you on Press Row. Before we wrap up, we've got to at least spend a few minutes here talking about this new statewide tournament. We bandied it around a little bit in our broadcast on RFM, as well as with our partners over on the K-Zone, WPKZ, AM 1280 and 105.3 FM. And we know this state tournament is coming. The things that we do know is it's a year out. There will be a year of study in between. So the 2020-2021 school year that we'll see, we'll be able to see the Max Preps numbers. We'll be able to see how a bracket would look, but that system will not be the bracket that they follow. They're going to continue to use Max Preps to rank, but it will still be the sectional or district tournaments that have been used in the past that will actually be played and competed in order to arrive eventually at a state champion somewhere along the way. Then 1 year after that, so the 2021-2022 school year, this new statewide tournament will kick in earnest. So you'll have the Max Preps rankings, the top 32 teams in a sport for most sports like football and some of the others, that don't have either the number of teams that participate in the sport or, that it wouldn't be feasible to have 32 teams in a bracket, are going to use a bracket that right now they think is going to be based on 16 teams in each division-based bracket. We'll go into their playoffs ranked by Max Preps. Teams that win 500 or better, like we're used to in the current system, will have an opportunity to play their way in. So if you were to take the example they used online, the MIA has got some great examples they showed from the softball tournament 1 year ago at this point in time. Who knew that when they created that example, there wouldn't be a state, of spring sports in 2020. We'd be looking at the 2019 numbers because that'd be all there was. But they have this 2020, kind of walkthrough of what, last year, if you had put it in a statewide system, would have looked like for the sport of softball. And you could see that there would have been about 37 or so teams that would have, made the rule, either been in the top 32 of Max Preps or been 500 or better. And then they pair up the bottom. So you get that 37th team is going to play, my math's not tremendous, 21 or whatever it is along the way. And they make their pairings on the bottom. And the teams that ultimately there'll be 32 teams when you get to bracketed play, but they'll give those teams that were 500 or better a chance to qualify for the top 32, and then they'll begin the top 32. So it adds basically a play-in round ahead of when you begin your first round of that bracket. But it's going to create what I think, generally speaking, and I get kind of excited just talking about it, it's going to generate some excitement. We're going to see the bracket. We're going to see play-in games. You're going to have basically a one-game playoff to be able to make it. That's, I think, one of the benefits of the current Major League Baseball system is, they have these one-game playoffs to qualify for the wild card. There's going to be a lot of, I think, excitement generated around that play-in round and then getting into the bracketed round. And yes, travel is going to be a piece of this, but it'll be exciting to talk about regardless. And it's not to say that the old system wasn't exciting. It's just that this is something new and different.
And think about March Madness. And, and you just touched on a couple of things, Todd, that transportation is going to be challenging because this is a statewide tournament. This isn't by region. So, a team from the Cape could be traveling to Springfield, or a team from up in the Gloucester area could be traveling to Holyoke, or what. It's going to be challenging. There is going to be some logistics problems, but you're right. When you think about March Madness and the basketball tournament and the energy and the excitement that's generated by those fringe teams, when, it was always, 64, well, now it's 66 and then 68. And they had a couple of early games to maybe that Cinderella team could come out of one of those playing games and then knock off one of the top teams down the road. And it just adds that extra level of excitement. And I think anything that can create more excitement is always good.
No question about that. And of course, Kate, everyone struggles, at some point with change. You have to kind of get used to and understand what change is ultimately going to look like. And of course, one of those changes that people are concerned with, for better, for worse, is the idea that you don't get to hang that Central Massachusetts, Central District Champion, banner, but you might have a chance to hang the, bracket, where we'll use numbers, with the bracket 1 regional champion, which would be the same equivalent of winning a district championship. It's just on a statewide instead of on a regional basis.
Yeah, I think I echo a lot of your excitement and a lot of Billy's excitement. We've had a taste of this a little bit when Leominster was districted elsewhere for basketball for a handful of years. So the travel piece, I think, is something that is manageable. I think that the aspects that you're discussing, I think are all manageable pieces. But I think that there are going to be a lot of people that have a lot of reservations relative to what exactly logistically is this going to look like. There is going to be the excitement of seeing new teams. But I think that there is going to be a logistical, potential for a nightmare when you have people that either don't want to be in the statewide playoff system. How welcoming are they going to be to a team that they don't know, or an administration that they don't know? I think that media considerations are going to be very, very interesting to see how that plays out. So I think that there are a lot of positives. There are a lot of things that I'm very, very worried about as well. And we're going to have to see how things shake out. At the end of the day, the tournament committee has made concessions relative to things like those district banners and such. You're going to be allowed to have some of that prior to the bracket starting. So I think some of that's going to be alleviated. But I think in our conversations with other members of the media and other athletic directors, et cetera, it's been made very clear we weren't going to be staying in the traditional Central Mass scenario anyway. And so it's a situation where you either have to embrace this moving forward and try to make the best of it and try to, really hone in on those positives while still being able to mitigate the challenges. I honestly, personally, as a member here of RFM, I'm going to challenge the MIAA to make sure that although certain aspects of this playoff and bracketed system are going to be left, the autonomy is going to be left to the individual athletic directors. I'm going to challenge the MIAA to step up and be a leader. Make sure that these athletic directors, make sure that these districts, make sure that these contests are being handled fairly. Because at the end of the day, let's say, like Billy said, if Gloucester is hosting Holyoke and that athletic director decides that the game is going to start at 2 p.m, well, I'm not okay with that. Not just from a media perspective, I'm not okay with that as a parent, and I'm not okay with that as an educator, because that gives an advantage to, beyond a regular home team advantage for somebody if you're not willing to play ball as athletic directors. I think that there needs to be some governance by the MIAA, and I'm going to challenge them to do that. In addition, with regard to media concerns, you have some very, very small schools that if they get the honor of hosting one of these opening round playoff games, well, they don't have media considerations whatsoever. They don't, they're at a basketball game, there could be 2 rows in the stands, and the stands could be right up against the court. Media is not a consideration in that aspect, nor are fans and parents. And so I really do want to challenge the MIAA. The statewide playoff system has been your baby and the tournament committee's baby the whole time. let's take it all the way across the finish line. If you're going to have clear delineated rules with regard to governance of how the tournament is chosen, let's also make the same thing for how the tournament is run, not just when you get to something like a Final Four and it goes into a larger venue. Those types of things should be handled, even though they may seem like minutia, how the parents are handled, how the media is handled, how an away team is handled, how the administrators have to report themselves, the way that they have to consider getting information and disseminating information. I challenge the MIAA to bring this baby all the way across the finish line. There are things that you're excited about it. Don't let it just end at, well, the teams and the sport and the max prep, we're good. Take it all the way across the finish line.
No, I agree with that 100%. You know, I think about, you know, the things that you're pointing to, and they've talked about it releasing guidelines for what a facility should look like, or a minimum set of levels that the facility has to have, whether it's lighting, seating, the ability to sell tickets, media concerns. And you hear about all that now when they attempt to convince you to vote in favor of the system. But then somebody has to actually lead. And I think that's the point that Kate is saying. If this is going to be a statewide system, there has to be statewide leadership. And you have to say, you know, it's not going to be okay that you don't let the media in until 15 minutes before game time because that's the way, you know, you decided to do it. No, it doesn't work that way when one system has media coverage that needs to be accounted for. So I think that's absolutely correct. I'd stand behind that challenge as well. But it's the same for visiting parents, and the points about the game time, Kate, are 100% true. No more of these, you know, 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon MIAA opening round playoff games like they do. For some reason, you know, leagues play games at 4 and 5 o'clock, and then you get into the MIAA tournament and the games are played at 3, and all of a sudden kids are having to leave school in order to go compete in athletics. That doesn't fly here when you're going from Gloucester to Holyoke, or Holyoke down to Marshfield, or something like that. No more. That's not the case. If these are student athletes and it's education-based athletics, student first, education first, then guess what? That means more night games, more games under lights, more games at facilities that can handle, you know, start times of 6:30, 7, and 8 o'clock or later. And let's just all remember that we are dealing with young adults. They can compete at that time. They can be ready then to be in class the next day. And oh, by the way, the MIA also promised this at their meetings, and I will hold them to this, that they will bunch the tournaments around a weekend the way that you see the NCAA do it. So in the case of, you know, NCAA basketball, where they play Friday, Sunday, you know, you play that, you know, Final Four round on, you know, the Saturday, and then you play the championship on Monday. They're going to do it, you know, Friday, Sunday, so that it's bunched around a weekend. So if you do have to travel a long distance, you're doing it on days away from the classroom. That's my expectation as well, is that education will be maintained and athletics will be allowed to compete, so that we don't, and I've said this to, you know, ADs and coaches, we are very much teetering on my concern, which is having athletics for the sake of saying we have athletics, not trying to deliver the best athletic experience for the student athlete. So we need to make sure that we do maintain that piece. If this is going to be quote unquote first class all the way, first class statewide tournament, make it first class all the way. I'm with Kate on this one. Take it to the finish line, Bill Thomas.
Well, I will say I'll make 2 points. Kate and I don't need much more than 15 minutes to set up a broadcast studio. Contrary to what you might believe, Todd, we've gotten pretty good at it. I know you roll in and put the headset on, but you guys wear 2 hats. You're educators and you're part of the media, so you're seeing both sides of it. You know how tough it is to make both sides work.
No question about that, indeed, and we will see with the weeks and months ahead exactly what will come of this. Been great having you here, Bill Thomas, on Press Row. We'll do it again real soon. Something tells me we'll have more to talk about before all of this gets restarted in a world of normal, post all of what is going on, when we hopefully return to that 2020-2021 school year and 2020-2021 athletic year as well. Thanks so much for being here, Bill.
Thank you. I'm sick of hearing the term, the new normal. Let's just call it, let's adapt to the future.
I didn't hate the old normal, so I'd be perfectly okay.
I got nothing wrong with the old normal. I'll be more than happy to go back to it. at my age, change is tough. I'll just say that.
There's
So
no question about that.
it is what it is, and it's not the MIA telling me that I got to do things differently. You know, it's just it is what it is. But you know, it's just it's a challenging future. But I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of challenges we can overcome from the media side, from the athletic side. But I feel like it's going to be good going forward. We'll make some good decisions, I'm sure.
We'll navigate it together. Kate Robbins, always good to have you here
you.
on Press Row as well. It's nice to be socially distant with Bill, but it's no different here, here in our home office, so to speak, as well.
We miss the heck out of you, Bill
No
Thomas.
question.
I miss you guys too, and I miss you guys too, and I'm looking forward to when we can actually be sitting elbow to elbow. I'm not going to be all that worried about social distancing with you guys. If we show up in the same car, we show up in the same car, they can't make us sit 6 feet apart by the time we have to work. And when it comes to the whole social distancing thing, when it talks about groups, you show up together, then they're going to make you separate because, you can't sit next to somebody. A lot of challenges going forward, but I'm looking forward to facing them with you guys.
Right back at you, Bill Thomas. We're looking forward to doing it all together right here on RFM. For Bill Thomas and Kate Robbins, I'm Todd Robbins. Like, subscribe, join us here on RFM. All the instructions are right there on your screen. We look forward to having you back with us here on Press Row real soon. Until then, we thank you so much for being a part of our family. And until next time, so long, everybody.